Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone podcast with KOMO Sports Director Niko Tamurian and Najee Moye.
Well, hello and welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone. We're going to call this an emergency podcast because the Mariners kind of like made that a crazy Thursday this week, didn't they, Nash?
Oh, I would say emergency, but Mariners fans and baseball fans, maybe they saw a little bit of the writing on the walls, but on an off day.
Yeah, well,
on a day off.
I actually asked Jerry DiPoto about that, the firing of Scott Servais, and I said, why today? Why? And, he said, yeah, the idea behind it was obviously the stretch we've seen this summer, the 2 months going from 10 games up to 5 games back. Behind that, you have losing 8 of 9 on the road trip. And then beyond that, boy, oh boy, it's been a tough year, obviously, but it's an off day. So Jerry was hoping to do it in person and then actually lamented that the news broke, which meant Scott Servais found out about his firing via, as Jerry said it, a crawl on the bottom of the news station, which I can only imagine was the MLB network. And
you hate to see it.
You do, because listen, you can agree or disagree with the move. Certainly Scott is not to fully blame, probably not even the majority of the blame in this. I think there's blame everywhere, whether you want to talk about players performing, whether you want to talk about the roster construction, and DiPoto will be the first to tell you that. But the reality is, and I know you've noticed this, Naj, is that in this stretch where they lost 8 of 9, it's just been interesting to watch this team because they don't have that same fight that they did. They just look defeated. And as DiPoto put it, they needed a new voice. And that's what they get in Dan Wilson. We'll talk about Dan later. But that's why it happens on an off day. Scott was supposed to be told in person, but instead was told via a crawl on the bottom of the screen. Kind of like you see Najee and Niko's names here on the KOMO News YouTube page.
Imagine you're sitting there at the airport or at a restaurant and you're just kind of looking down and you just see your name has been let go by the team of your choice. Can you imagine that? Honestly, on a day off. Now, that being said, getting a fired day off sucks. Let's say fired, getting relieved of your duties, it does suck. But that being said, it's not just the bats that look dead. The whole entire team kind of looked dead. Now people get swept by the Dodgers a lot. Sure. That first game against the Dodgers, when you get one hit,
that's difficult.
It's really just difficult. But that's like it's consistent with the behavior that we've seen from these bats all year. We've seen injuries plague this team. But even when you're a superstar, when you're 10-year, contract guy, Julio Rodriguez is just either not playing or striking out all the time. It's just, who else do you look at? You've got Cal Raleigh hitting home runs on both sides of the plate sometimes, but all the time just not.
Yeah, I think ultimately what happens is that this is an organizational thing. There's a lot of people at blame, but it just so happens that Scott Servais ends up being the guy.
And that oftentimes happens whenever there's when the team is on the downslide, cut players are oftentimes not the first to be cut.
Right.
It's oftentimes it's not the GM, it's oftentimes the manager or the head coach, because it's just the easiest move to swap out. Now, I have said this ad nauseum on this very same podcast that the problems that have played the Mariners this year were the ones that kind of covered up in the playoff year. They've had the same problems for the past 4 or so years.
Yeah,
just lack of contact, a lot of strikeouts, and just a stellar pitching staff, which I don't even know if it'll stay together next year.
Right. And it depends on. This was a turning point because we talked about this championship window. We've talked about it at length this summer.
You're 500.
Yeah, the fact that you're 500 2 months after you had a 10-game lead.
Yeah.
And we've talked often about this championship window with those pitchers you mentioned. And that's a tough deal. Again, is Scott Servais to blame? As we show some photos of Scott doing his thing. Certainly, it's not all Scott Servais.
Give me a percentage, though.
Well, I think you got to.
Because he has to work with what he has.
Correct.
And he's got great pitchers and the hitters. The lineup has looked a lot different from the playoff year.
Yeah.
A couple years ago.
Right. But it's as DiPoto said in his press conference, it's gone beyond just having a poor offense. There's been a lot of things that are just really hurting this team. And ultimately, it feels like when I said a moment ago that they need a different voice, that the message isn't getting through. I don't want to show you a statement from Scott Servais. Yeah. And you can see my hands on the side here, but I just want to read this here. I've devoted my entire life to baseball, from playing Little League games in Coon Valley, Wisconsin, to leading the Seattle Mariners for nearly a decade. It has been one of the greatest honors of my career, and my family and I are grateful for the shared experiences along the way. To the tremendous people of whom I've had the privilege to work alongside every day, players, coaching staff, support staff, ballpark employees, media, and all who had a hand in this journey, thank you. Together, we ended a 21-year postseason drought, and just days ago, held first place in a fiercely competitive division. To the players, you've been the core of this journey. The energy and competitiveness on the field match the camaraderie and the bond we shared in the locker room. Nothing has been more rewarding than watching you grow and bring your all to the game. I know that this team has a bright future ahead. To the Mariners ownership, I appreciate the opportunity to lead our team the last 9 seasons and bring a winning culture back to the Pacific Northwest. And to the fans, you are the soul of this organization. Your support has driven us to push harder, fight longer, and never back down. The return of postseason baseball to Seattle was a moment we shared together, and I am confident that your commitment to this team will continue to push them forward. To the city of Seattle, you embraced my family and me, and we are forever grateful for your support. As this chapter closes, I leave with pride in what we've accomplished together and excitement for what the future holds. Thank you, Seattle. Scott Servais. You know, Naj, I want to leave that up for one more second. I love that he said, I leave with pride in what we've accomplished together and excitement for the future holds. Certainly that's a high road a little bit, the excitement part of it. Certainly that he won't be a part of anymore. Certainly he had a hand in developing some of those guys. But ultimately, they did do a lot. There was a lot of things done with this program, and it's just that you have to maximize these windows, and it's been a slide, and you got to do something.
You have to do
something, and maybe it's not all Scott's fault. Maybe it's not even a third Scott's fault, but it's the, for lack of a better term, easiest move for that front office to make.
It's the easiest move for them to make, especially maybe three quarters of the way through the season.
Yeah.
Definitely. When they're still, and that being said, they're still trying. I know they're 500 now. They only maybe about, Houston did lose today, their first game against the Orioles today.
Right.
So they're a little bit more than 5 games behind, a little bit more than 5 games behind the Astros right now. That being said, that's a very optimistic statement.
Yeah, sure.
It's super optimistic. I mean, but that being said, one playoff appearance in the last 9 years. I want to be critical of Servais specifically, but I feel like this is like the first domino to fall of a couple.
Well, that's a good point. Does ownership clean the front office with Dipoto and whatnot? And do I think that's the right move? I don't know if that's the right move.
I don't know if that's the right move. It's the only move they can.
Does that happen?
I think probably, because you look at maybe the players that they brought in. They brought in Justin Turner, who's like 80.
And he's my age.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, Niko. And they brought in Randy Rosarena, who's been hot or cold. I mean, and that being said, they've lost more decent hitters than they've brought in the past couple of years. I mean, you say what you will about Jared Kelenic, and they brought back Mitch Haniger again, which is fine. But I mean, and you lose guys like Teo who's literally putting up all-star numbers.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, he wasn't. I mean, he's still a good player here,
great player,
but he's not the guy that we saw before, and not this year in LA.
I don't know what happened. I mean, Teo was killing it in Toronto. He gets to Seattle and he's moderately killing it, and then he gets to LA, he's super killing it again. It just doesn't really make sense to me.
I'm sad about it.
Because
Scott's a good guy.
But one playoff appearance in 9 years. That being said, I mean, I think the team has grown under him.
Yeah,
the city has grown to love the team, especially the pitching staff. It's
almost like you went like this, and then 2023 you kind of flattened out, and then it's kind of dipping. Can it go back up? Absolutely. But I think that the Mariners are trying to do everything they can to ensure it does.
We look at that one playoff appearance. You follow the team throughout it. Do you think that was a little? I mean, and that's it. Even all 3 years, all through the year that was like, okay, the Mariners still can't really hit.
Yeah,
but all the hits are timely.
And that's the thing. The timely hitting, we saw it earlier this year when they were doing well.
When they're doing well,
not so much here in the summertime.
Right.
The pitching has gotten better than it was in 2022.
Oh yeah,
certainly. But that's the thing. You've got better pitching now. And in fact, if you want to try and get to that record you were in 2022, where you won 90 games, It's probably not going to happen.
It's not going to happen
because you'd have to basically go something like 26-8 or something like that.
Not only that, the other teams in the division, I'm not even talking about Houston. I'm talking about really Texas. That's gotten so much better. And the Mariners have just kind of just treaded water, hoping for the best because of the pitching staff, I think.
Right. And that begs a question, why can't guys hit in Seattle? I mean, look at what happened with Teo. Ty France is playing much better now in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
The scientist meteorology degree in me is saying, there are factors, but the Mariners have hit before. Yeah. I mean, there's no question T-Mobile Park is a pitcher's ballpark,
right?
Without a shadow of a doubt.
They only play half their games there,
but they've, guys have hit big home run numbers. Haniger, before he retired, Corey Seager had, some big numbers there. So it's like Julio has done well.
It's not even the home runs; it's the lack of contact. I mean, the Mariners are like batting .216.
Yeah, that's
right
crazy.
Now. That's not
well.
Good,
That's just it. The strikeout numbers are up. That has nothing to do with the so-called marine layer and all that stuff.
No. The number of hits that they have, they're last in a lot of in OPS, so 28th. Runs per game, 3.9 runs per game. That's 27. Slugging percentage is 365. That's a good average.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I always say, everyone loves the long ball, everyone loves home runs, but it's not. It's just the contact just isn't there.
Yeah.
You can call it injuries. I look at this team and I look at the lineup and I know Kyle Raleigh is the catcher, which means that he probably is the leader of the team.
Yeah. I mean, JP is like this cap, as they call him. But,
and then Julio's
Cal's right there.
And Julio's the most popular player. I think, honestly, it all starts and ends with Julio.
Sure. Well, yeah. And certainly this has not been his best year. It's been probably the worst of the three.
It's been the worst of the three. He started out egregiously. I mean,
and look what happened, right?
Exactly. And he's been kind of hurt up and down this year. And I mean, I get it. Injuries are not great and you really can't predict them and you can't fault anybody. But when you're the center fielder and you've got that big fat contract and you are the guy on a team, I mean, they give him a big contract very early in his career, and he deserved it based upon what he had done up until that point. But I mean, that being said, maybe another voice in the room. We've seen this with other teams. We've seen this with a lot of other teams, different sports, a different voice in the room. I mean, that being said, I wonder how tone deaf all the players got from Scott, because I mean, he's kind of demeanor wise.
I think it's not even Scott's fault per se, but the fact that like whatever he was teaching or whatever he was saying, you don't get the results. And then you're kind of like, okay. Like,
it becomes white noise. I don't know.
Yeah.
I always thought the Mariners needed kind of like a guy, like a rah-rah guy. I compare him to a lot of guys like maybe even Terry Collins from the Mets from forever ago.
Right.
Who could be a good option, honestly, for the Mariners. Or even guys like Aaron Boone, or even old school Mariners fans like Lou Piniella, who are just like, I don't want to say hotheads, but I mean, you need someone who's gonna strike a fire in this roster.
Yeah.
And we saw in the Dodgers series, and people lose to the Dodgers all the time. The Dodgers are one of the best teams in baseball, but they're fighting to make the playoffs too. But so are the Mariners,
Yeah.
Getting swept on the road by the Dodgers was egregious. So it was hard to watch.
Yeah. And same thing happening to the Tigers.
Tigers too.
I remember Dave Sims, the famous announcer of the Mariners, saying when they got swept by the Tigers, he said, if the Mariners don't make the playoffs, you can point to this series.
Yeah.
This sweep is why. And it's been a free fall since then. One win, and that was over the Pirates. And it's been rough since then.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to do an impromptu fair or foul here with you.
Okay.
Fair or foul. I was going to say, well, I can't say fair or foul because I was going to say, do you love or hate what we saw today? Probably somewhere in the middle. So fair or foul, you love that the Mariners made a move today to fire Scott Servais. Do
I love it? I don't want to see anyone get fired ever.
Well, sure. But that they made a move.
It was necessary. They really
was necessary.
They had to do something, and honestly,
I don't think it's. I don't know that this is the right move because we'll find out. But
well, we had to look now at the guy who's taking over.
Yeah,
starting tomorrow. If you're watching,
let's take a look at Dan Wilson.
If you're listening to this on a Thursday,
there's Dan.
Dan Wilson, Mariners catcher, Mariners Hall of Fame catcher.
Yeah.
For a long time,
everybody loves Dan Wilson.
Everyone loves Dan Wilson, who's never managed in the major leagues before, right?
Yeah, no, and he's never really managed much really anywhere. He did a little fill-in stint with the Rainiers. Right. Kind of like what he's doing now. But Jerry DiPoto made an interesting thing when our buddy Ryan Divish with the Seattle Times actually asked him, he's like, so is Dan the interim manager? He said, no, Dan is the manager moving forward. And that's significant. Now, listen, if the Mariners go 10-30 or whatever. Then,
okay.
Then he's not.
Right.
However, if they it's a little more solid ground than interim.
Well,
That's what it feels like to me.
if you take over a job,
Because why would you make a point to say he's not the interim? He's just the manager going forward.
Right. Well, and that's a vote of confidence because maybe the organization wants to see more united, or because I mean, let's face it, it's almost September. The season has a month and a half left, about 2 months left. I think if he's saying that was if Dan Wilson works out and the Mariners miraculously make the playoffs and Houston has a historic breakdown, then this looks like a great move and then he'll be the manager going forward. That being said, if he goes 10-35 for the last month and a half of the year, then I don't see him if he is worse than Scott Servais record wise in the short amount of time that he has, which is a really tough. It's a really tough position to be in if you're Dan Wilson, never managing a big league club before.
Right.
You're coming in. This team is literally 500, and you have to manage literally tomorrow. Okay, this is almost like Ted Lasso a little bit.
A little bit.
And you have to get to know these players. And these players have to trust you. And you have now the good news is you're not on the road. You've got a 2 series, the Giants and the Rays at home. Give the fans need to give him grades. I imagine that the fans will be packed out of that ballpark. Honestly,
I think it'll be a big crowd Friday night.
I think it'll be a big crowd Friday night. It's gonna be tough though. I know he's the manager going forward. How far is forward? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe he's the manager as long as Jerry DiPono has a job. I don't know.
Well,
that,
yeah.
You know?
I think Jerry was doing Dan a solid by saying it's not interim.
Yeah.
That it won't be. Hopefully, it won't be a surprise that he turns it around and becomes the permanent manager.
Maybe,
but he's technically the permanent manager now.
He's right.
It's just, when you're talking about
interim can also mean or manager going forward, meaning that they don't have anyone.
When you have 34 games left, it's kind of like, okay,
they don't have anyone that they want to hire currently.
Well, and DiPono said he's like, you can't really do an extended search during a season.
Exactly.
So listen, you give Dan Wilson the job. If he makes up this 4.5-5 game deficit, like boom, your job is done.
This is not an insurmountable deficit.
No,
by any
it's not.
means.
I mean,
the Mariners lost more than that earlier.
Right. You don't have to be even epic 1995 proportions. You can just be like last year, stuff like that.
Right. No, I can see it happening. That being said, like I said before, if Dan Wilson ends up turning the team around, a 5-game lead is not insurmountable. There's plenty of time to do it. Just a lot of things have to happen. Maybe Dan Wilson has the secret spice, the secret juice. He's got Jordan special stuff. I don't know.
You never know.
But
can I bring up a quick example for you, Nash?
Example of what?
Well, I thought I remembered this. I'm just doing some quick research as you can kind of see me looking down at my computer here.
Niko's always studious. He's always studious.
Last August. Now listen, I know the Mariners didn't make the playoffs, but they missed by 1 game in 2020,
which was also heartbreaking.
But
okay,
mid-August of 2023, the deficit was 7 games, and they cut it to 1. Okay. Just think about that. That's more than we're at right now, and they cut it to 1.
Yeah, I mean,
so to your point, and now listen, you didn't go through a managerial change, you didn't do any of that, and yes, they had a huge win streak that ultimately. By August 9th, they were of 2023, of course, they were 5.5 back. By a year ago today, the 22nd, it was down to 1 game.
Right.
And so you were kind of, but the point I'm trying to make is really kind of piggybacking off what you said, that it's not insurmountable. This is while it's difficult, it is a potentially really good opportunity for Dan Wilson to make his mark, but also for Jerry DiPono to look like a genius. Love the guy that Scott Servais is, and he'll forever be remembered for ending the drought. The dad vibes that we all loved.
Yep.
If you're Jerry DiPono, who's a little bit embattled as far as the fan base is concerned, and you make this move and you make up this deficit and all, you go to the playoffs, everybody's happy. I mean, right?
Right, exactly. But
as opposed to if you didn't make the move and you kind of limp to the finish
line. You got to
line.
try something.
Right.
Is the idea. And this maybe is a signal to Mariners fans that if Jerry DiPoto's out after this year, I don't know if he is or not. But that being said, we've seen GMs. The Mariners have been 1 playoff appearance in 9 years.
Yeah.
Let's just say that first of all. And those are firing words.
Yeah.
For a lot of people in a lot of different organizations. But this is definitely like a move to the fans of saying we're trying, we're hoping to the
and the Mariners needed to do that.
And the Mariners need to do
as
something.
As much as you can lament somebody being fired.
Yes. I also wonder how much is Jerry having to work with as far as funding wise, as far as money wise.
That's always been a question.
As far as like landing these guys. I mean, we see. And I'm not even just talking about just the East Coast teams. I'm not talking about the Yankees or Red Sox. I'm talking about teams like the Dodgers. I'm talking about teams like the Giants, even.
Yeah.
Or the Rangers, who are just opening checkbooks for these guys. The Cubs are kind of the same way. We haven't seen the Mariners do that so much. I mean,
yeah.
And I think, obviously, you want good players, you got to pay good players. Who are they paying right now? Julio? To do
Luis?
What? Luis?
They gotta pay Cal Raleigh.
They gotta pay Cal Raleigh, but they have to. I mean, a great baseball team does not a center fielder or a pitcher and catcher make. No, it's. I think a lot of work has to be done in the offseason. I don't really know if.
Yeah,
I don't know if the whole entire philosophy of the Mariners is going to translate to next year. I think this team, organization-wise, is going to look a lot different next year.
It may. I think
if Dan Wilson cannot flip the switch.
Yeah, this is really going to be a wild 5 weeks or so ahead here.
Right.
I want to go to some quotes from DePoto and the Zoom call he did with us.
Yeah.
Thursday afternoon.
Very, very.
Our team is telling us we need to do something differently. This is that. I thought that was powerful. Something else he said, actually a few seconds before he said that, we need to get back to believing in who we are as players. And that speaks a lot to me. He certainly wouldn't get into conversations he had with individual players or respect that and understand it. But it seems to me that he's seeing that the message from Servais wasn't resonating anymore, that he's not seeing the same ball club that he saw, forget 2022, that he saw in May.
Yeah.
And, he goes on to say, we believe in this team. It's been a very difficult 2-month stretch, a particularly tough 10 days, but trying to do what we can do with a team. So he repeated this statement, trying to do what we can do with a team that is telling us we need to do things differently than we have.
Do you think?
So he repeated that phrase, we need to do something differently.
Do you think
team is telling us that?
When he says team is telling us that, do you think that phrase should be taken more literal than
it might be? I would, my initial interpretation was telling us by their actions,
right,
and lack of effort, not to say effort, but lack of production.
That was my thought too, but I didn't even realize that and I listened to a lot of this. I didn't realize that he repeated himself a couple of times, and
making a point.
Yeah, maybe team leaders kind of was like, hey, that is not unheard of either.
No,
it's definitely not unheard of. It's unfortunate, but one playoff. I just think back to one playoff appearance in 9 years.
Yeah.
I've gotten text messages from Mariners fans a week ago.
Yeah.
Telling me that this is this.
What did my plan email to the newsroom say for Thursday?
It was like, hey, listen, be prepared. Because,
expecting this to happen. Yeah.
Expecting this because the situation just is not great.
Yeah.
The situation is untenable.
Right.
No.
Well, and that's the idea of it, that we kind of saw this coming. I don't think, again, I'll repeat, I don't think it's all on Scott. I don't even think it's like a third of his fault.
Let me ask you
but you have to make a move. Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about coaches in Seattle here.
Yeah.
Just this calendar year.
Oh my God, it's been crazy.
Dave Haxtell.
Carroll.
This reminds me a little bit of the whole Pete Carroll situation in that now that was at the end of the year, and Pete Carroll didn't bring a Super Bowl to Seattle, the only championship to Seattle, other than the Storm's championships. But it was maybe just like it's time to just move on, type thing.
Well, yeah, and I think that what I liken it to is very similar to that.
Right.
It's when you see college programs that are kind of middle of the road, that they make a change, not because it's the coach's fault, but because they need to do something, whether it's apathy from fans, whether it's a lack of response from the players. And you see this a lot in college football. You'll see like a 7-5 program, like, well, they should be happy with that. Like whatever that program, either like they've always been middle of the road or whatever.
I think about Mel Tucker and not Mel Tucker. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. The guy from Michigan State. Same exact deal.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you suddenly are like, we have to get the donors excited.
Right.
The Mariners have to sell tickets.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's gonna be a long
much chronicled between us and our buddy senior reporter at KOMO, Chris Daniels, about how the Mariners own Root Sports and there's question marks there with losing the rights to the Kraken and now the Portland Trailblazers, and just the regional sports network business model in general. And without diving too deeply into all of that, I guess the point I'm trying to make is you got to make sure your ticket sales are up. And if you kept sliding and sliding, nobody was going to be there in September.
No.
And by doing this, whether it's Dan Wilson creating some awesome things and getting this team to the playoffs and getting us pumped up, not just in September, but for what will be in 2025, you either get that, or let's say, they don't keep Dan Wilson. You get to have the energy of a new manager and say, this is the guy that's going to, whoever it may be, that's going to take us to that next level. And you sell tickets that way. That's what it is to me. Listen, I'm not saying it's just a money move, obviously.
But like there's maybe about 45% of money.
Because I don't think it's all Scott Servais' thought. I think the Mariners had to do something to spark this ball club. And hopefully that's what Dan Wilson does. To get more out of these players, because certainly there is more there. There's talent there.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, let's get this fan base ready and excited to root on their fan favorite Dan Wilson. And you know what? If he can end things on a high note, great. If he can't, people are still going to love Dan Wilson.
Let's talk about
and then you go into the offseason with a new leader, hopefully.
Let's talk about the thought of bringing back a Mariners legend in Dan Wilson.
Yeah.
What smart?
Well, when you're not doing a full search,
right?
Dan's here.
Yeah.
Everybody loves him.
Right.
It's almost like I hope he does better, but remember the Colts had Jeff Saturday coach for like 3 or 4 games.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully Dan does better, but it's the idea of like, there's nothing to lose.
No.
You might find a fan favorite to be your permanent head coach. If not, he stepped into a difficult situation and he's not tarnished at all. That's why I think it's a great decision.
I think it's a great, okay. It does make sense. Me not being a long-time fan, like maybe for the past 4 years, I literally had to do some Googling, and I was like, okay, so this could make sense, but a catcher for another catcher, another former catcher.
Yeah, well, a lot of catchers always make good managers.
Catchers always, that's true.
One of my favorite all time was Joe Girardi, just because he treated me well professionally back in the day.
Yankee legend.
Yeah, sure.
There you go.
And, one thing I want to point out about this is that one of the things I really enjoyed about the Mariners, and we get to cover them, is the vibe of the clubhouse. I think that Scott had a really cool vibe going there. It was very loose. It was very like good vibes, not to just keep repeating that phrase.
Good
like
vibes
you always heard
only.
Eugenio Suarez say.
Apparently the vibes weren't good enough.
Well, but I wonder what a new culture will be. Will Dan Wilson upset the cart that much, or will he kind of just keep it going? And if it's not Dan Wilson next year, then what do you do to ensure you're getting the most out of those guys?
So let me ask you, Dan Wilson 2025?
Okay, so what are they? 64 and 64.
Yeah.
So you have 30.
Let's say they don't make
4 games left. If you don't like because you're 5 games, 4.5 games back. If Dan goes like 22 and 12, something like that,
that's ideal.
He makes a strong case to come back. Yeah.
Right.
I think if you're like below 20 wins, then it becomes a more difficult sell, and then you have to say, you know what, like let's get a real new voice. If this is assuming in this scenario that it's still Jerry Dipoto, Justin Hollander, who I think, given their constraints, so to speak, really do a nice job. I really do believe that.
Right. Well, given what they had to work with, yes,
yeah,
I think
they agree
need
with
to
that.
have more to work with. It's the thing.
I think that assuming that they're making that call, I think that if Dan goes 20 worse than 20 and 14 over his last 34 games, then they say, you know what, Dan, you did a great job. Right. We're going to chart this new era going forward, and they're going to find somebody that has a little more coaching experience that, in addition, will get the Mariners fan base this offseason that they can say, hey, we hear you. We see that you're frustrated. We know that you wanted the playoffs the last couple of years. So have we. And to that point, we've made the very difficult, something Dipoto called the most difficult professional day of his career. Mm-hmm. We made that difficult decision in letting Scott go and not keeping Dan Wilson on in that scenario.
Right.
And we're going to find the right person to get this team back to the postseason. And then the energy is there in your hot stove off season.
I think we need to, all these things sound great. Especially talking about the next couple months of the year. what they really need is for Houston to go on a massive slide.
That would be great.
That's actually what they really need. You know?
Yeah. I want to see playoff baseball, and I think it can still happen.
I think it can still happen.
But you had to do something to stop the slide. You had to do something to maybe be a wake-up call. Unfortunate what it was, but from a pure business perspective, again, for the 30th time, I don't think it was all Scott's thought, but from a pure business perspective, I get it.
I think if we're talking about blame as to why the managers are the way that they are, I think you really have to split into thirds. Yeah. These are professional baseball players.
Yeah.
This is what they do. I mean, you can have a manager in your ear telling you what to hit, how to hit, but at the end of the day, you're up there at the home plate by yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you're catching balls by yourself. You're fielding balls by yourself. You know, you're running the bases by yourself. You have to know what to do. Some of that just comes from the manager, but some of that also comes from your own brain, from your own ability, you know. 2, a leadership in the clubhouse.
Yeah.
I mean, people want. I know Julio Rodriguez is like 23 years old.
Yeah,
he's 23 years old and he's not hitting well.
Sure,
he's the highest paid guy in the clubhouse. You know, Cal also great. Everyone loves Cal. He's probably the only one who's consistently hitting moderately.
Yeah.
Injuries has just decimated this team, and honestly, adding Randy Rosarena on paper is great. It's just not enough. You know, Justin Turner's your age.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, hey, easy. That's why I feel young as long as LeBron's still playing.
Exactly right.
LeBron.
But also
just not in good shape as him. But yeah,
the owners can open up their checkbook.
Yeah, and like, listen, it doesn't even have to be Shohei money, but that also goes back to what I was saying about the Root thing. I mean, they took over that network, and there's fewer and fewer subscribers where they make money. That's going to be a developing thing. Now I'm happy with what they did at the deadline because the big fish out there just weren't available.
Right.
You know, and very few teams can spend the money like $500 million to get Shohei.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to see, in addition to whatever the new manager, whether it's Wilson or somebody else this offseason, you're going to have to see a commitment in bringing in some help this offseason. And I think we will, but it's, you have to, because they know it. That's why they get rid of Scott.
When you put the Rangers lineup side by side with the Mariners lineup, there's no like, what are we doing?
And they're still better than the Rangers because they're pitching. And,
exactly.
You know,
exactly. But when we just put the Astros lineup right next to the Mariners lineup, it's glaring, you know?
Yeah. It's unfortunate it came to this. Now let's see. Dan Wilson gets a shot.
Dan Wilson on Friday night at the Giants on the bench, hanging out. T-Mobile Park.
I can't wait to be there.
You're going to be there tomorrow.
I'll be there. Yeah, live and it's just gonna be an awesome time.
That's gonna be a fun day.
Najee,
watch.
This was like therapeutic. We call it an emergency podcast to process. I feel like I've processed now.
Yeah, we definitely processed because I mean, and honestly, like I know the news broke today, but a lot of people were just kind of like for weeks now, just been like, Scott, what are we doing? Like, what's happening? Something a domino has to fall. And like I said, if things don't go well this year, I don't think Scott's the last domino to fall. You know?
Yeah.
I think if the team doesn't make the playoffs, there's a lot of pitchers on this team that, I mean, if they start selling pieces off, they can get a lot of prospects back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. And I still think the window's there next year. And so you really got to go all in before Logan gets too expensive. And I'm not saying too expensive to keep, but I mean, that number keeps going up and up and up.
Yeah.
And given the three-man starting pitchers, he can go wherever he wants.
The Mariners go 5-6 deep at starting pitchers.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, any one of these guys, I'm talking about even down to Brian Wu and Emerson Hancock can be number 1 or 2 starters on a lot of different teams.
Yeah, there's a premium there for sure.
There's a premium.
So, yes, let's see how this experiment goes. We'll continue discussing it, as well as the Seahawks as they get going. This can be a lot of fun.
I'm excited for the Hawks this year.
I have no idea what to expect.
You know what?
And I've been at a lot of practices. I just don't know what to think.
I'm just gonna say
I like everything Mike does. I think they're gonna be good. I just don't know what to expect with it being so new.
Byron Murphy's a strong man.
I love Byron Murphy.
He's a strong man.
Yeah,
that's all I'm gonna say.
And I love Jake Bobo. We're gonna bring you something from Bobo next week.
I'm excited for that.
Najee, this was therapeutic.
Do we feel better, Mariners fans?
I don't know. Talk to me October 1st. Take care. That was the KOMO Sports End Zone. He's Najee. I'm Niko.
Bye-bye.